And I think it kind of pointed towards some of the absurdity of, what people were now having to do in this situation.
It is odd to see like certain tidbits. Like, is Clark one of the people that is immune to it?
You get what you get and you don't throw a fit.
Like a bup 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 boop boop boop.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Mark and I are talking about Station 11, Episode 5 from HBO Max. So, spoilers are ahead. And if you're enjoying the content, then a like is appreciated. And if you don't want to miss a single one of these videos, then be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications. And with that, let's talk about some of the characters and kind of what is going on in this, starting off with Clark.
Yeah, this was, we've had these episodes which are going from Kirsten's point of view in the far future, and then we have these little tiny stories about other characters that give relevance to the bigger picture story that's going on. And Clark, who we see in the first episode, we see him in a couple episodes. He comes back, and I think he's like the main character in this episode.
Absolutely. I think it was interesting what you were saying about like the different plot lines that we're kind of jumping between because they are so separated in terms of time and space, but they all share a kind of common thread, and you can tell they all share a common thread in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And it also feels like they're all going to kind of coalesce in the future.
Yeah.
But because they're so far apart, it's a little bit hard to tell exactly how that's going to play out other than it seems like Tyler is probably the prophet, but we still don't
Yes.
understand how this has affected that and like what exactly is going to come out of that.
Yeah, and I think that this episode showed, we'll definitely dive deeper into Tyler, but
Yes.
Tyler seems to have picked up a lot from Clark, right? Like Clark has always been in the shadows of Arthur. It seems like he has always been like a side character, right? Like whether
Yeah.
it's been in a role or just his relation to Arthur. And this was the first time that Clark could be a leader figure.
Right. It was interesting. What is her name? The mom.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Okay, so it was interesting that Elizabeth called him Mark Antony after his, kind of rousing speech. And then he kind of went with that. And when, Elizabeth and Miles and Clark were kind of talking about leading these people, Clark did say that they could form a triumvirate, which is, what was formed, with Mark Antony, except Clark then says, but with four people. So, whatever that would be. But I definitely thought that was interesting, kind of seeing him step out of the shadows and step into a role that he doesn't seem comfortable with and something that he has to work so hard to kind of gain that respect, in comparison to Arthur that so easily had everybody's love, even though he wasn't great.
It's kind of D-bag. We learned a lot about Arthur and how kind of awful he is. I do think that, yeah, like Clark did want to. He always struggled being what Arthur Leander was, and I think that because of the weird circumstances, and Elizabeth kind of says it to Tyler later on, she's like, maybe this is like a good thing for us that we're finally like the world is shutting down and now there's like not these expectations. And with Clark, he gets this, you know, because they're in this unprecedented situation of like forming a community at an airport, it gives him the opportunity. Like he's not competing with Arthur, he's not competing with anybody else, and he can finally, with ease, step up into that leadership role.
Right. It's interesting because I think the show kind of started with the end of civilization as we know it, and then it jumps into, what is it, 20 years into kind of a new civilization, and now we're kind of back to right after the end of civilization. We're seeing the start of the new civilization. Like
Mm-hmm.
whatever happens here and in other pockets like this is very much going to form that. And I thought that was, and so it focuses very much on Clark with that. But I thought it was interesting the tone of it. The music in the beginning was kind of lighthearted, considering how wild what is going on around them. It actually reminded me a little bit of like a Wes Anderson type movie,
Oh.
and it seemed kind of anachronistic, like it seemed to not quite match what was going on, and I think it kind of pointed towards some of the absurdity of what people were now having to do in this situation. And so I thought that music was, while not quite seeming to fit, at the same time it set a great tone that I think did make it very much fit.
Yeah, I really liked it. I think I know what you're talking about. They had it almost, it was like an a cappella of like one person singing like a bup 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 or something along those lines. And
Yeah,
I interpreted that as that's kind of how Clark is viewing this whole situation, because it's all in the beginning, like the first couple days before they really feel like a society, before Nick Roker leaves and takes everybody, and
right,
it felt like this is how Clark is accepting this new, or this disease, if it was real or not, and they're all kind of like, oh, this is gonna blow over, and then it slowly turns
right,
into, oh, this might be real. Like we might be in trouble here.
right. Yeah, I don't think it's completely set into everybody. In fact, because cell service isn't great here, I don't think that Clark really gets Tim's voicemails until probably after Tim is dead. So I don't think that he really gets to struggle with the idea of Tim passing, and
Mm-hmm.
instead just kind of learns about it after the fact, after he's been there probably just long enough to realize that this is the new normal.
And a little bit of heartbreak with that voice message that he hears. He's basically saying like, "Where are you? Why aren't you answering?" Like he doesn't know if Clark's alive or dead, and Clark finding out that he was absent from being there for his partner, and it's very very sad.
Absolutely. I think, when we saw Clark towards the end, I think this is the start of the, what was it, the Museum of Civilization?
Oh, you think so?
I do think so, because Clark was gathering a number of knickknacks from past society, and he mentioned the past a few times. He early on he said that they were going to have to abandon the future, which I think is kind of them saying abandon what you expected to happen in your lives. That they were going to have to embrace the present, and that the past would be a roadmap to kind of how they got there. So it definitely feels like he wants to hold on to the past, but also is accepting that the future is never going to be like what they all thought it would be. Which
Hmm.
we'll get to this kind of when we talk about Tyler, but I think it's a very different viewpoint from what kind of Tyler thinks.
Right. And
And I
I'm
think
one
it really paints a stark contrast between the two.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if Tyler wanted to travel with the symphony to get to the Museum of Civilization.
Possibly, although the symphony didn't know about the Museum of Civilization, so unless he
Well,
does have some kind of.
he says he wants
Go
to
ahead.
travel with them just for a little bit, right? So maybe he's trying to travel with them, safety in numbers, until he can get close enough to the Museum of Civilization so that he can bring down potentially a future Clark.
Oh, because yes, because he, if I'm right that this is the start of the music, then he knows where it is. So even though they haven't
Yeah.
introduced themselves to anybody until just now, if they didn't move, then he knows where they are,
Right.
and he knows when he'll be close to them.
Right. And they won't be expecting him because they all think he died.
Right. I did also think something else interesting that Clark said was when Miles shot the person from the airplane, who everybody was worried was infected, but he'd probably been on there long enough that, he was immune. Clark did say, "We are not monsters,"
Right.
which I did think kind of fed into to the monsters, we're the monsters. And I think that whether or not they were acting in self-defense, from that person's perspective, that was a pretty monstrous act.
Right. I mean, even from Tyler's perspective, and I think
Right.
a lot of this episode showed how Tyler became the way he is. And, seeing Clark, who like seeing somebody alive and being like, okay, we have a human being, like he's not sick. Clearly, he has lived in this plane for 12 days. We'll bring him to the rest of the living people, only to be killed right in front of him. That's, you know,
Right.
that looks like everybody's a monster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Real quick,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
about that guy that came off the plane,
Yes.
he looked very not all there. I don't know if you
He
interpret
did.
that. And I was trying to think of like maybe this was, somebody with disabilities that was able to survive for 12 days in this airplane, or if the sickness, if you get the sickness and then survive the sickness, if it like damages you in a way. I couldn't tell, but he did seem really off. Like like somebody yelled zombie.
Yes. And it did very much remind me of the person that was driving into the tree in episode 1, where that
Right.
person definitely seemed like they weren't completely there, cognizant.
Right. And I
So,
don't know if we're gonna find out anything about that, but it was interesting that to see this person that seemed very zombie like.
right. It the way that they've done this is such an interesting perspective, because we saw right when it was starting, but we haven't really seen a great picture of what exactly is going on, other than there was pandemonium at the hospital, and it seems like it has, an almost 100% mortality rate. And then we saw society afterwards, when, I don't know, is it gone? Is it still hiding in pockets of society? I mean, with its kill rate, unless it mutates, it would be pretty hard to survive long term,
Mhm.
because most likely it would just kind of kill populations before it could spread. So I am kind of curious whether or not we get to see what it's really like, or if we're seeing kind of the bookends
Right.
and not kind of seeing that. It's an interesting perspective, and it feels so different from a lot of other post-apocalyptic ones, where we would normally very much be like in the thick of it
Yeah.
and seeing that stuff, rather than kind of like the before and the after.
Yeah, and also it is odd to see like certain tidbits. Like, is Clark one of the people that is immune to it because his partner was clearly sick when he said goodbye to him? They didn't kiss or anything, but if it's super contagious, you would think that Clark would have been affected by it, but he seemed to walk out relatively unscathed. Whether the guy that came out of the plane, if he had it lingering on him, or if it had been time enough that he's not affected by it, and how Tyler and Elizabeth were affected by being near that guy. Like there are more questions I feel like about the virus as a whole and how it if there is immunity.
Right. Hopefully we see.
Hopefully we
It
see.
the way it jumps around, I feel like it keeps you guessing as to what you'll find out and what will just be kind of left ambiguous. And I like that.
I do too. I don't think because it's such a compelling story. I don't feel like we need the answers to this sickness. Like whatever we get
Yes.
it still feels satisfying based on the characters. Like I don't need to know
Yes.
like the 100% kill rate, immunity. If they leave that all ambiguous, I think that's okay.
Yeah. I would say that this show has me feeling like something that my friend's 6-year-old daughter says. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit.
You get what you
But
get. You don't throw a fit. Okay.
but it's not because we don't have a choice. It's because they've made something compelling and I'm okay with like what they're revealing and what they're not revealing, you know? So I'm enjoying the ride.
Nice. Yeah, yeah.
Let's chat about Nick Roker or Jerry Mercer at least a little bit.
Yeah. I think that there are in times of desperation when the shit hits the fan, if you will, there are always going to be people that are trying to take advantages of these situations.
Absolutely. I think it also points out that it doesn't matter who you were before. When something like this happens, there's a whole new hierarchy that forms based off of what you can do for the people that you're around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, Nick, who used to be Jerry and probably felt like he was at the bottom of the totem pole, was able to quickly take advantage of things and rise to the top of a select group, you
Mm-hmm.
know, which is kind of like a stark contrast to Elizabeth, who was on top in terms of at least like status in society, wealth and fame, power normally kind of comes with that to a certain extent. And she ended up with very little afterwards, and only through her connection with Clark did she really kind of continue to have relevance at that point. So it's just interesting that it kind of shows you like it doesn't matter who you are when something like this happens. Like it matters or who you were before. It matters what can you contribute.
Right. And I think, Elizabeth, I guess, kind of still had that status of like she was famous and then now she was one of the three leaders of the new community. But
Right.
she does say it, you know, when she's like I had mentioned earlier, when she's talking to Tyler, like maybe this is good for us. Like now we don't have to live those lives, and like there's like an expectation from living those lives that you're supposed to be a certain way, and now she can kind of fade into the rest of the community as a member of the community.
Right. As somebody that really and not to poo poo on art because I absolutely love art, but as a kind of a more meaningfully contributing member to this society, because I think before her contributions were more in terms of hopefully bringing joy,
Mm-hmm.
but as a C-list actress, it's possible that she wasn't necessarily spreading that to a huge group.
Well, even
So I
as in the role of like as a mother, right? She kind of, like Arthur wasn't a great father to Tyler, but it also doesn't seem like she was the best mom to Tyler. Like she had a nanny. She seems like she was pretty absent in Tyler's formative years. And like this gave
yes.
her the opportunity to actually become mom again and actually be like, "Oh, I get to be your mom and like not have to worry about being an actress."
Right. Which once again kind of like it doesn't matter who you were before because now it's everything's changed. So I thought it was interesting. One of the people that Nick took along, because he took the soccer team minus the goalie, he took the nanny,
The nanny.
and then he took Elizabeth's boyfriend, which I'm pretty sure that is the guy that has rode the bicycle to meet the traveling symphony to tell them about the Museum of Civilization.
You think that was him?
I'm pretty sure that's him.
Interesting. I didn't think that that was him.
I could very much be wrong.
No, I like the thought that it could be him. It did seem to me, and I could be wrong, the guy from the Museum of Civilization seemed like a very generic, awkward white guy. And Elizabeth's boyfriend was Italian, I think. The Italian boyfriend is what they referred to him as. And I know that Italian people can be very white, but he seemed like to have a darker complexion. So I'm not.
Okay.
But I could see it being true. What makes you think that?
I just thought I recognized him.
Okay. Now I have to go
And
back and
maybe I'm
look.
wrong about that.
You might not be.
So what that makes me want, and so all of this hypothesizing could be meaningless if I'm wrong about this. But if I am right about this, and I'm also right that this is the start of the Museum of Civilization, then that means that something probably terrible happens to that group in Miami, or that is headed to Miami, which could explain why he has like the bad head injury,
Yeah.
and that after whatever they dealt with, he went back to where he was hoping there was safety, in that airport. So I don't think we're done with that character.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't pick up on that, and because he was the pilot, right? That they said the Italian boyfriend was the pilot, or was that
No, I don't think he was the pilot. I think he was just the boyfriend.
okay? Because I know they had talked about the pilot, and I think they had mentioned
Yes,
Elizabeth's boyfriend at the same time. So I was thinking that I thought that it might have been him that flew the plane because we didn't really see like another pilot that I could recall.
right. Yeah,
So
I don't know about that.
yeah, that was a little ambiguous. And see, I just wrote them off. I said they're gone. They just died. They went to Miami, which probably huge population of people that are there at the airport, and
Right.
whole soccer team except the goalie gone.
Huge population that refuses to wear masks. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get too political.
um,
Let's chat a little bit about Tyler. And I think we've
Tyler.
already started to like dip our toes into this. It was very interesting seeing, I don't think he was a major part of the first half. I think that kind of Clark was a bigger part, but we were seeing him. And then I think there was around the halfway point, we kind of see a big shift, and he's been observing a lot of things, and I think kind of has a bit of an epiphany that pushes him down a very dangerous path. And actually, going back to the music, that was the first time that the music, during the Christmas party, when he stepped away,
Gets creepy.
it went from, yeah, so creepy. Like we'd had the fun music, and then going into the Christmas party, we had a song "Man Oh Man," which I thought had some interesting lyrics, and then it just like flipped to some super creepy music, really kind of letting you know that there was a change of pace. And it's interesting seeing this character's genesis.
Yeah, we learned a lot. I think from this episode, it seems like Arthur not a great dad, very
Yep.
absent in Tyler's life. Doesn't really seem to have a strong male figure in his life other than Clark. And I think
Hmm.
I it's something about like maybe 100 or so days that they've spent in this airport. In a month of that he was in quarantine, but
Right.
I still think he picked up a lot from Clark as a leader figure. You know, we see this episode, nice little bookend for last episode and this episode. The episode that we previously watched ends with the lighter flicking, and this episode
Yeah.
begins with the lighter flicking, but it's not David, it's Clark. And we see it a couple times throughout the episode, making me believe that he picked up the flicking lighter from Clark. Like that Clark was a huge
Right.
influence. Clark became a leader, and that maybe inspired Tyler to become a leader of this cult to get these people to follow him.
Yeah. But I think he potentially, while he might have appreciated some of what he got from Clark, I think he very much disagreed. And I think there were some small early signs. The last thing he downloads from the internet before he doesn't have a signal or a hotspot or whatever anymore. is a Wikipedia article about capitalism, and he considers possibly erasing it, you know? So I think he's starting to see the seeds of so much of what is wrong with society is things that are being held on to from the past. And that's why I think that time in quarantine really resonates with him when he sees the line about to them there is no past.
Right. There is no before.
There is no before. Yeah, that's what it is.
And he repeats it over and over. There is no before. There is no before. There is no before. And yeah,
Right.
I totally agree with that. He disagrees with Clark and his ideas, and I think most of the people that are, the pre-pandemic people, they all
Mm-hmm.
have this is where he sees this trauma, and I think it was, it comes to a head with how they shoot the person,
Right.
and I know Miles ends up shooting him, but it does feel like an extension of Clark at that point. And
Mm-hmm.
so Tyler, seeing this from these people that were like his equals in, ruling this community, and he
Right.
definitely disagrees with the trauma that they have coming into this.
I think potentially to him, I think he might think that the real sickness that we have to worry about is not this flu, but rather, the past that people are clinging to and the terrible things that people will do because of that, you know? So I think he sees that as potentially the worst thing.
Yeah.
And that's why he's, possibly looking towards he is looking towards the future, but it's not the future that the other people were hoping for before the flu hit, but instead, a new future that is free of all of this kind of baggage.
Yeah, and I think, like you were saying with the capitalism article, like he's talking to his mom, who may be the person he would be closest with, and he's like, "Look, we could just get rid of this. We don't even need this." And she,
Right.
holding on to that trauma is like, "Oh, it'll just come back again." So in that moment, he's like, "Well, if we truly want to get rid of some evil crap, then like even you, mom, you're the one that's holding on to this, terrible legacy of humanity. We got to start something new."
Yeah. So we had another reference to ghosts in this one, and the fact that he's confused about them, which is interesting because in the previous one we heard that the prophet told, I think, a ghost story to the kids before
Right.
the kids disappeared.
Right.
So there's some kind of connection, and I really am itching to try and figure it out because to me talking to ghost seems kind of like holding on to the past, but it doesn't seem like that's his thing. So I wonder exactly what is going on here, and I really want to learn more about this kind of connection and see where it leads to.
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty, a little breadcrumb of what he becomes later as he's luring all these children, a Pied Piper sort of person, bringing these children into his cult, and how he was, in a sense, organizing the children to, in this episode at the tower with the, having them talk to ghosts. It shows a clear arc of where he's going. Like, this is where he started, and we see what leads him to. I mean, I guess we don't know exactly what led him there, but we see that happens later on. Like, he communes with children to get them on his side.
It's interesting. This very much reminds me of, even though it is so different, but this to me has parallels with Foundation, where in
Mm.
Foundation there were things about kind of like curating the past in order to prepare for the future, and there was this idea of ghosts from the past and how they, continue to be thought of going forward. So it's just kind of an interesting little correlation that I noticed.
Yeah, I love that.
Because it definitely seems like each camp is trying to kind of curate the future that they would like to live in. I think Clark is trying to curate a future where hopefully we can get back to what things were like.
Right.
And I think that potentially Tyler is trying to curate a future where we're free from this baggage that causes people to do terrible things.
Right.
And maybe that's some type of like a utopia.
You know what? I was just thinking about another thing that lends credence to this being the start of the Museum of Civilization is they make a small comment about rigging solar panels to
Mhm.
these batteries and that they had this all in plan, and we know that they have some form of electricity at the Museum of Civilization.
Right, because they
Because he said,
because
I
they had a
listen to this,
CD.
and he says, I listen to it all the time.
Yeah.
And he's like, how do you listen to this? That,
Oh yeah.
I feel like, is a very, very subtle, just a tiny little breadcrumb to let us know that they're the Museum of Civilization. Wow, I did not even think of that, and I'm so excited to see this unfold. Are we going
Yeah.
to see Clark again?
I think we'll see Clark again. I think we'll definitely see Clark again. I thought it was interesting the last two shots. Tyler watching young Tyler watching this thing he set up
Hmm.
where he's, freed this group from himself and set in place, these machinations to be able to start working on his plans for a future without this kind of baggage. And then it cuts to David, who I assume is Tyler,
I mean,
watching like the prophet,
pretty sure it's him.
watching, yeah, watching the play. And it's interesting because he seems like a soft-spoken, charismatic leader that does a lot of observing and thinking versus, Clark when he had his moment to shine, he yelled out loud and roused people using a speech. And when they were having power issues, once again, like it was a big loud speech, everybody come to me. Like he is very loudly kind of taking the pulpit and the power versus it's interesting how quietly David Tyler the prophet whatever is able to kind of like almost like the Pied Piper where he like compels people in this really interesting way where they can't help but to come to him. He really seems charismatic in an unusual way.
Well, and Clark says it. He says, when he's talking about Arthur, he's like, he's bold. Like Elizabeth already said that Arthur could command people's attention like
Right.
flawlessly and effortlessly, and Clark calls Tyler as this mini Arthur that has all the same attributes. He's able to get people to listen to him, but he's a
Right.
destroyer, unlike Arthur, who is not a destroyer.
Right.
I did also. There was the moment where Elizabeth tries to lie to him about his father. He's writing
Oh yeah.
these letters to him, and he burned them. And she's telling Clark, she's like, he knows when people are lying, and that felt like a callback to when Kirsten was talking about talking to him and saying that it was like a game where it was like, do you know that I know that I know you're dangerous? And like to me, it felt like he knows when Kirsten's lying right off the bat because he just has
Mm.
this gift. Yeah,
Ooh. Ooh.
yeah,
So like he really was kind of toying with her to a certain extent.
right. And she even said that in the last episode when they talk about the
Yeah.
conversation. He's just like, she was like, it was like a game to him of like, I know you're bad, but he wants me to not know I'm bad or whatever, and that made me feel like he
Yeah.
knows when people is lying when Elizabeth said it this episode.
Yeah. Ooh, I think you're right about that.
Yeah. So, and I think we'll see more of that come into play.
Yeah.
And like, how do we even stop it at this point? Like, I feel like he's, we're 5 episodes in and we've only been, like, we got him in like the second episode fully
Right.
there without knowing his machinations until he is where we are now. Like, what are we gonna see? How do you stop this guy?
Right. I mean, I don't even feel like we yet have an understanding completely of what he's trying to do, what his goals are, or at least like how he's going to accomplish them.
Right. Like, what is his master plan?
Right.
There's so much to unpack that, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
But with that, I think our journey has come to an end. Thank you folks so much for joining along. Come back next week. We will be doing Station 11, Episode 6. So we look forward to seeing you then. I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.